Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com. I know I look rather lackluster this morning. It's another rumor day. I have another doctor appointment this afternoon. The reading I did a couple days ago, or was it yesterday? It's all a blur, I don't know. But where the Queen of Batons popped up, and I said it doesn't usually describe who I am, but that I have to have her energy. Well, I had her energy when I saw my doctor. I think I'm on that list of difficult patients, like Leonardo was on in Seinfeld, because I wasn't leaving. He was just saying, "Oh, go see someone else. Go see another doctor. It's probably not what we all thought. And it's like, this has been going on now the second year. Something's wrong with me. The things that are said in the office to get you out the door aren't followed up on. So I was sold a bill of goods while I was visiting the doctor. After the doctor left, and I spoke to the nurse. I said, he's going to follow through with this, right? Oh, yeah, absolutely, right? So I get a phone call 2 days later. Okay, well, we don't know. Well, it's a long story. They do know. Anyway, I'm going to see another specialist today, and I'm getting a new primary care physician. And I said my piece on the phone. I had the Queen of Batons energy when I shared what I thought. So I was polite. Never cursed, never raised my tone. But I just let them know what I thought. That's all. So now I'm looking for a new doctor because I'm just, not because they said anything to me. They did not. In fact, they bent over backwards once I voiced my opinion and how I needed something better than what I got from them. So then they did bend over backwards, but it was like a little too late. Shouldn't have to go through that. So now I'm in search of a new primary care. My problems can be solved. I'm not really concerned for mine. I think mine are going to be resolved okay once we finally figure it out. I do appreciate your well wishes, but there are others here on our channel. I said our channel. I'm beginning to see this not just as a legacy for my descendants, which I do, is the reason I created this channel, but I have such a beautiful, can I call you an audience, or I have such a beautiful group of people who comment regularly, who watch my videos, who say wonderful things, send me lovely emails. So I really feel as though we've kind of got a little family here, and thank you for that. I know one of us needs some well wishes more than I, and that would be Sebastian. Please say some prayers for Sebastian. And I want to, again, I don't know what day this is of the Kickstarter. This might be the last day for Valentina De Luca's Kickstarter for the Maître Nua Marseille, or the Cherokee Maître Nua. But I'll put her link again for her Kickstarter down below, and if you can still get in. And for those who are not in a position to do it, that's a lot of us, at least keep it on your radar so that, in a couple of weeks, if you're able to purchase it, there may be still some available. So we wish Valentina all the best luck in the world, always, because the quality of that deck, I just think it's never been equaled by anyone. It looks like an hand-painted paintbrush, not with a stylus pen. I mean, we're talking serious talent. Okay, some of you in my last video requested that I do continue the theme of Rider-Waite-Smith and TdM, and so this time I'm going to use more historically accurate decks to do the side-by-side comparison of meaning between Rider-Waite-Smith and a TdM. For the Rider-Waite-Smith, I have a very basic it's not basic. It's as true a facsimile to the 1910 Crackleback that was created in 1910 by the Waite-Smith collaboration. And this deck was made available for public, for purchase over at Make Playing Cards by Conrad Steyn. He only charges us what it costs him to print the deck. That's awesome. Okay, so it's like maybe I think I paid like $35. I don't know if Make Playing Cards has that going up in price, but it's only the cost of what it costs him to make it available to us. There is another one, the 1909 Lily's Back, that I've used many times on this channel, but today I'm using the 1910, and I'm going to be comparing it not with an Italian deck, but with the Conver. It's not the first TdM, of course, but it's definitely the one I think that Pamela Coleman Smith probably would have been most readily aware of as far as the TdM realm. Of course, we all know she was familiar with the Solabusca. I'm not pulling that one out. If you want to see the Solabusca, I do have a playlist for Solabusca. There's probably about seven videos in that. So let's flip the camera and get started. Oh, and this one, of course, was published by Yves Renaud. Okay, 2017 is when this one was published. The Nicholas Conver from 1760. Now, as some of you are eager to point out, when I did my other comparisons using Rider-Waite-Smith, I did not get into the secret society, what prompted, the creation of this deck, or what their thought processes were. These are details and accounts that I read decades ago about what was the behind story for the creation of this deck. I'm not revisiting all that. There are other channels who can give you proper history, and not just the history, but what they were thinking exactly, and all the hermetic and astrological and anything else that I don't mention, in my videos, because it was a long time ago that I read them. And frankly, I'm looking at these cards as a tarot reader like you. You buy a deck like this, you're buying the deck and you're interpreting the pictures. Maybe you'll read a book about what the meanings might be, but you're not necessarily going down the rabbit hole of what the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was thinking. Okay, so please bear that in mind. I'm looking at these cards as people who are looking at the cards at face value. And maybe, I'm going to put them in this order since this came first. And there's no denying no matter what history we look at, there's no denying that these cards were based on these cards. And these cards were based on earlier cards. So keep all of that in mind. Okay. So here we have the Fool of the TdM and of the Rider-Waite-Smith going on face value and knowing origin stories. Now, I am more interested, and so I'm more well-read, on the origin stories of the Triumph cards. And the French were based on the Italian. And apparently the occultists maybe were not familiar that the game originated in Italy, or they chose to ignore it, and they preferred to believe that it came out of Egypt and that stuff. I'm not sure. I can't recall what Waite was thinking in regards to that. But by the time of 1909, when he created the Lilybacks, he didn't like the color, and so he had another publication in 1910, and that's what this one is. Supposedly his preferred colors. The first colors were printed poorly, is what I believe he felt. So here we have someone from the origin stories that we know, someone who's kind of like the lowest man on the totem pole of human society. In fact, he's so low he doesn't even have a number. He's unnumbered. Now, the animal that's with him may be his companion. I've seen illustrations of, ancient Rome where beggars like this guy or similar to Italian beggars had their dogs with them and their dogs traveled with them. So that could be it. At the time that TDM was invented, maybe the dog wasn't perceived as a companion because that was an Italian thing. So maybe the dog was seen as like somebody who was something that was attacking a stranger in their town, was passing through. He's got bells on. Could be a reference to having been, a jester in a court who could speak the truth, but it could also be a reference to, hey, this guy's in town. I hear his noise. I hear his bells, that kind of thing. There is a history of the fool in the earliest decks making noise. Now here, we don't really have anything like that. In fact, this guy looks like he's dressed. He's a youth of privilege. He's got some fancy garb on here. He's got a dog that is not attacking him. So he's not like, maybe he's frolicking with his master, who seems unaware that he's on the precipice of perhaps danger, and when you have nothing to lose, you got nothing to lose. So maybe he just feels like falling off a cliff is no big deal because he's got nothing to lose. I don't know. But I don't know. I can resonate with this guy because I see, well, you're low man on the totem pole. You got nothing to lose. You can speak truth because if it's a reference to a court jester, those were the only guys that could speak the truth. I don't get any of that with this guy. I just get the sense of an entitled youth, lovely clothing, maybe a foolishness of inexperience. You could read the dog as a companion, sees things optimistically. Maybe he doesn't recognize dangers or perils. The magician is another one that I, depart ways with. The number. Now we said that the fool was so low on the rank of social norms that he didn't have a number. Well, the number one. These cards are ranked in order of their importance. Okay, it was a game, so the higher number cards triumphed over the lower number. So number one is very low. So this guy would be a cobbler. Sometimes he is a cobbler. Okay. However, in the case of TDM in particular, he's a con man. He's the bateleur. He's the guy that comes around with the ball and cup game and takes your money. He's a swindler a little bit. He comes through town. He's outdoors. He sets up his wares outside, right? So much like the fool, at some point the town is going to get tired of him and he's just going to move on to the next town, just like the professor in The Music Man. I forget his name. And then here, although he's only number one in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, he's exalted to a very high position as a magus, right? So he's a creator. He manifests. This guy's a con man. So there are, even though, truthfully, these cards are based on these guys, right, who are based on earlier cards yet, they changed the importance, or they changed, the understanding. Now we do have the lemniscate, just to show eternity power. We have we clearly have the items of the four suits. Now I'm convinced that this was supposed to represent Pope Joan. Whether she existed or not is immaterial. At the time she was invented in the early Italian decks, I believe the people believe she existed. Pope Joan would have therefore been given a low number because she disgraced the Catholic Church, So, there's that. But here we have the exalted high priestess. And we have lots of references to Kabbalistic tendencies. She's mysterious. And Pope Joan was also. Pope Joan had secrets. So let's not forget that. Could there be crossover with these two? Yeah, there could be. Pope Joan had secrets, and if you've seen enough of my videos, you know what her secrets were. She was educated, she was learned, but she was also found out, right? And but I think I get, we don't have the female, we don't have the female pope here. We have the high priestess, which I can understand, maybe trying to modernize the name to make it seem more palatable. So we have, a woman of mystery who doesn't necessarily dip into the realm of who Pope Joan was. And we have pomegranates, we have the columns, we have a moon. Her gown, goes into the fluidity of water. So this maybe just be, there could be crossover. This is more, I think, women things, women issues, the mysteries of womanhood. This, I think too, the cause of woman, trying to elevate herself or being learned in a time when, women were put down. And really, has it really changed all that much? I mean, we've made strides for sure, but for every 10 strides, every 2 strides forward, we got 35 backward, as we have right now. But I'm trying not to get political here. Okay, the Empress could have been any generic Empress. I'm sure the eagle represents which Empress, which, realm she was part of. I used to know all the eagles, and I can't remember. Here we have the Empress. She seems very fertile. She seems very approachable. She's looking right at us, She also, I believe, has pomegranates on her, as did the High Priestess. They did not change the name other than to make it in English. We, in place of the shield of the eagle, to represent her regional domain, we just have that she's governed, or that she's, feminine. But she has power, could be of the secular sort, whereas this power is more spiritual. And I think the same could be said regarding the Empress of both decks. Here we have an Emperor, called the same thing, secular power. Here he's identified with ram's head rather than the eagle for strength. We have similar accoutrements. This guy's outdoors, so he's, available, participating. He's out with his troops. This guy's just sitting on his throne is more like maybe less hands-on, as a, or at least the image where we have him right here. It's interesting because he does seem to have a mountainous background, but he seems to be on some type of really solid throne that's not immovable. Like this guy could, I forget what the name of the chairs were that used to be collapsible and you could take around with you. That's what I think this guy probably has. But he seems more afoot, he seems more with his troops. He's a man of action more than maybe this guy. He's telling them what to do, but he's sitting on his throne that's not collapsible. Okay, we go from the Pope with his minions, or his acolytes rather, who are either cardinals or pilgrims, but they have the tonsured head. We still see the tonsured head. So these are holy men seeking the audience of the Hierophant. Now it's got a new name. This one is giving, some type of benediction or some type of blessing, as is that guy. They both have the triple tiers. Interestingly, they both have columns, and they both have the same staff, the triple staff. And this one has the keys. Sometimes we see keys. I'm not sure if it's always with the female pope. I don't see keys with her. I'm checking her out. So sometimes we see keys. Sometimes it's with the female pope. Sometimes it's with the pope. Well, here we don't see keys, but here we do. I think we could, get the same idea with these, like holy men or spiritual men that you might be able to seek the counsel of for matters regarding things of a moral nature. Sometimes I've seen many people use the Hierophant because most people use this deck, some variation of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, as showing, government. And at the time when the Pope card was created, the Pope did have a lot of power. Let's face it, he doesn't really have that kind of power now, but at the time he had a lot of, governmental influence. I know there's something else I want to say about the Pope. I don't want to move forward until I think of it, so I'm going to pause and take a minute. Well, it escapes me. But a lot of times when I see this card, no matter what the question is, I'll see it as maybe you need to seek counsel. These guys are seeking the audience of the Pope or the Hierophant, right? So they want to seek him. They want his blessing, right? They want his approval. So sometimes when I see this card, it can also, in both cards, suggest, this is what I was trying to think of, somebody who's so orthodox that they're unyielding. They're so strict about what they believe. So that can also be an aspect of both of these fellows. So we have more similarities, I think, with the Triumph cards because the origin sources are the same, even if one deviated to some degree. Lovers, okay. The lover card was the lover in the TdM. And in the early Italians, and I think this too, it represented a betrothal or some type of promise made. Now with the TdM, sometimes I think it was probably intended to be, the magistrate or the person, the officiant, doing it or getting sometimes we see the person with a crown, so maybe it was blessed by the Pope, not the Pope, or it was blessed or sanctioned by the law, that kind of thing. But some of the decks, as this one, kind of looks like two women before a young man. And so then that kind of gives a sense of, is this young man trying to decide which woman is for him? So even the French deviated from the Italian because the Italian source was a betrothal between two individuals who made a deal to partner up in marriage. But then by the time, it got to France, maybe some of it was misunderstood, maybe that, that this was maybe an officiate, or maybe they just parted ways and decided we're going to give this guy to make a choice between, sensuality and virtue or whatever choice. So sometimes when we see this card, because there's two women and not a magistrate, right, we could say, well, maybe there's a choice between two kind of things, regarding the heart or regarding some type of bond between individuals. Here, it's called the lovers, so it's not a lover trying to make a choice. Obviously, we have reference to Adam and Eve. We got the tree, we got the snake, we got the, an emissary from God. So, temptation. And also remember that sometimes, historically, tarot cards do have some nudity, and if it offends you in any way, turn off the channel. Here we have the Chariot. Okay, now, in the Italian deck, sometimes the charioteer was a woman, sometimes it was a man. Always a virtuous individual. This one is, being celebrated. He's at least a prince, right? The charioteer is think of chariots in parades, the hot shot of the parade. If it's a sports hero, we celebrate them. And I think we get that same idea here. Here we do have the nod to the Egyptian stuff rather than horses. They took the opportunity to do that, and whatever that infers in their minds, whatever that, conjures up for the occultists is something that I don't, usually concern myself with. But if you want to investigate further and learn, more about that, It's been decades since I read this stuff, and I'm not revisiting it because I'm just not. I'm going by memory with this. But they both have the epaulets on the shoulders. They both are a crown prince at least. They're in a fancy canopy type of enclosure. And they're heroes. Okay, Justice. Now I changed the order because in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, Justice was 8. Excuse me. It was 11 rather. Justice, in my view, is properly listed as number 8. But they felt the need to I think it had to do with astrological stuff. I don't know. But I just put them together here. So we have the same accoutrements. We have a woman viewing us head on. She's in a wingback kind of chair. It's a bit exaggerated over here. Here there are columns and, some kind of a screen behind her. But here it's like a wingback chair. But I can see how they got this design from this. And she's got her sword and she's got her scales and she's seated. And I think justice is justice. I think we can, read it either way. Here we have the Hermit of both cards facing in the same direction, unlike the Fools who were confronting each other, right? When we looked at the Fools, they were looking at each other, right? Here, they're going in the same direction. They both have lanterns. They both have walking sticks. This one seems like the Fool to be at the top of a mountain, but he's not. He's aware of it. He's not going to foolishly fall off. What's he illuminating? Well, maybe he's illuminating his own way, and he realizes that he doesn't want to fall. Or maybe he's illuminating the way for those before him who might be climbing this mountain to seek his attendance. And here we just have maybe more of a monk, like a capuchin who's, spreading the word, his word, whatever the word is that he's spreading, probably religious. But they're both elderly people. Originally in the Italian decks, it was time, right? It was called time, like the passage of time. And the lantern was an hourglass. But it became, I guess, bastardized or misunderstood and became a lantern, which is fine. You read the deck. When you read a deck that's got a lantern, you talk about illumination. When you read a deck with a hermit and he's got a hourglass, it's about the passage of time. And I also understand the hermit as the passage of time, no matter what he's holding. But I do prefer to see an hourglass rather than a lantern. And I think Valentina De Luca's Mitranua deck definitely has a hermit with an hourglass, I do believe, because she calls it time. So I'm very happy about that. Okay, I got this in the wrong order. Okay. So again, we have 11 for fortitude. But in Rider-Waite-Smith, bear in mind that they have it for 11. But they have the same kind of concept, and probably the image of the hat inspired Pamela Coleman Smith to give the lemniscate, as she probably did with the hat of the, here, let's take a look at these guys. See the source. Yeah, so it's probably the same thing. The hat reminded her of the lemniscate, and maybe that's why she took the opportunity to put the lemniscate there. I'm not her. I don't know. I don't remember what I've read. I'm just saying. I'm a person who's looked at a lot of cards for a lot of years, and so most of what I say is observation based on my understanding of the origin sources of these cards, and how other people interpreted them. I mean, the deck creator took the images they were familiar with and the legends and the stories and the agenda they had, and they combined them and they created their own deck. And that's what every deck creator does, I'm thinking, unless they're interested in just publishing, a facsimile deck, or if they're creating a new deck based on You know, they're creating a new deck based on older traditions. So, okay, we have a maiden who is in a relationship with this beast. She's certainly not afraid of him. He's maybe like a rambunctious little doggy, you know, or kitty cat, you know, that sometimes, you know, maybe she's trying to give him a pill. I don't know. You give your kitty cats and your doggies pills, you know, sometimes they're not always agreeable, but they seem to have a nice little relationship. I think they could be read either way. Okay, so I screwed up here. Where's the Wheel of Fortune over here? Let me find it. There it is. I don't know what it's doing back there. Happily, it was easy to find. Wheel of Fortune. So we have the wheel going this way. I think in this regard, it's going this way. Here they take the opportunity to put whatever letters they want to make associations to whatever their agenda wanted. They have some Egyptian stuff, but they do have a nod to the four corners, which we don't see here. And I think in both cases, 10 representing, you know, changing, you know, going into the next level of numbers, right? We had single digits, 10 is the next layer. So we have 1 on steroids. Life, 1 is about beginning, right? 1 is about, you know, the beginning of something or unity. And 10 is about going to the next level, changing. Okay, the 11 cards. I guess I had them out of order. So the 11 would have been the Fortitude card. So I guess I'm sorry I got that out of order. So please forgive me. I should have been more careful. Here we have 12. Now, I'm convinced that the halo came as a result because of all the earlier Italian decks and the French decks, for the most part, had blondes. And so somehow because they were towheads, they were, you know, that's who was depicted in the early Italian decks. They were blondes. And then in some cases, they were blondes in the TdM. So I've never read this in any book. It's my own observation. It has nothing to do with any scholar that I've ever read. But I'm convinced that the towhead of the blondes over here became the halo of this individual. This guy's a criminal. This guy's being punished for treason or for, you know, theft or for something, you know, not good. And he was intended to be alive because the whole point of him being recognizable was so his family and he could be disgraced and humiliated. That was the point of it. But here we have this young man who's exalted to halo status. You know, is he a martyr? Was he killed as a martyr? A lot of people, you know, associate him with Christ. Well, I have news for you. Christ wasn't killed this way. You know? So there's that. I think the one that we might have in common is that I can see this as a suspension, especially if the Hermit card were to pop up and, you know, maybe something taking too much time or, you know, something being delayed. I can definitely see that in the context of the question. I see it more, though, as punishment for having done something. But here, I don't think so. I don't think that understanding is brought into the Rider-Waite-Smith. I think it's more like he's enlightened. You know, he's somebody who's willing to sacrifice his life for the greater good or something like that. But I don't see it like that. Okay, I think death is death. And we have a lot of this similar things where we see crowned individuals and just anybody in, you know, body parts, and death comes. And it doesn't matter what rank you are or who you are. I think maybe this deck probably shows it a little better. We have a fallen ruler here. We have, you know, individuals perhaps begging for mercy. Of all ranks, right? Here, unlike in this one, we do have like a new day. So, you know, with death or the Black Plague, which is what I think the early Italian decks and the French decks were referencing. They remembered the Black Death and how it came through, man. And it, you know, now we're you know, a few hundred years later, and, you know, that idea calmed down. We have the specific flag. I think that's of the, was that of the Tudors? The rose. My memory is slipping, but I know that has a special significance. That's being referenced in the death card for new beginnings. We see the sun rising, right? So death comes, but there's always something that comes after. Whereas I think this one is more of a final thing. But I don't think it's a mistake to say, with death, even with this card, even though there's no sun available, with the death card comes the ending of something and makes something available, especially if we have the sun card somewhere in the spread, because there's always a new day. But this one has it built in. Temperance I see as toxicity. They're both called the same thing. I just see it as, what the word means. The word means temperance, to minimize the effects of something by adding to it or changing it in some way. Now we have a triangle here in the Albano Smith deck. We have a rainbow. So there are other things associated with this card than what I'm saying that is deeper with them. They have, a different understanding. One foot's in water, one's on land. We're not sure what's going on here with her in this particular card, but we do clearly see the same concept, a winged figure. Both of them have something special on their forehead, who is pouring liquid from one to another vessel. Both are outdoors. In this case, this one is has a foot in water. And the sun rising is more like a crown. I'm sure that means something, as do these yellow orchids. So that could be a starting point or a jumping off point for you guys. Oh my goodness, I should have really made it much more careful thing when I did these. My goodness. Okay, the devil. Well, I get the sense, I think we both all get the sense that this guy's a bad egg. He's got wings, but they're not wings of virtue. I say that every time we see the devil. It's kind of like if I had t-shirts, this would be another thing I'd say. They're not wings of virtue. As I say, in the context of a question, there's a lot of Marilynisms, that I say on the regular. It'd be kind of funny to figure them out. Here he's got a torch that he's holding. Here the torch he's holding, but he's holding it low. Same, hand gesture, horns on both. Here we have, sometimes we see faces on the knees and stuff like that. And in both cases, they have their minions. Could these be, a reference to Adam and Eve? Now they've grown tails. All of them are chained or tethered to the master, who is evil. So when we see the devil, it's a lack of virtue or it's overindulgence. It depends on, for me, other cards that surround it. If there's lots of cards of, say, cups, and this shows up, there could be a suggestion of abuse of alcohol or even drug abuse. And I think with Rider-Waite-Smith, the tendency is more to have positional meanings than it is to read them, like kind of fluidly. When I read Rider-Waite-Smith, I probably bastardize their intent, because if I use it personally or for clients, sometimes clients ask to have the Rider-Waite-Smith, but in my signature spread, in which case I'll read them very much like I would read TdM, how they bounce off of each other in proximity of one another, because that spread is not apositional. This position means this, and this card in this position means that. I don't do it like that. But I still will use, I will give both meaning. When I do a signature spread using Rider-Waite-Smith, and it's rare, but sometimes people ask for it, I will give the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning, but I'll also mention that it could also be something else, and that's when I'll reference the historic. But it gets a little more confusing because I'm not pinpointing it as well as when I read sometimes, it's not that it doesn't get pinpointed as well. Here we have the tower, the the mansion of God or God's house, and we have here the tower. And I've mentioned it before, I really am convinced that the earliest of the celestial cards is the tower, because I don't think it was focusing on the tower as much as it was focusing on something happening from above. And in early Italy, at the medieval times, when these decks were created, what was lightning striking? It was striking their newfound towers, their new built towers. They were very proud of their towers, and lightning was striking them because they were the tallest thing in town. But at any rate, we have, the same kind of thing, lightning striking, people falling. And maybe they're they're falling because they see it as their last resort, to escape harm. Here with the Rider-Waite-Smith, we get a greater sense that they're going to have greater harm because they're falling. Well, we can't even see the ground, so, trying to avoid that is, it's going to be catastrophic. Here, maybe it's not, so catastrophic because they're not falling very far. But I think we're to understand that they're taking a great fall. But here we really do get a sense that they're taking a great fall. And of course, the crown is brought to this one. It could represent, an institution that's, not going to do so well, or it could have to, if somebody asks about a relationship and this card pops up, it could suggest that it won't be a healthy relationship, especially if something like the Devil card pops up or other cards that might suggest something's unhealthy. Now, the Star card, how could you not love the Star card? In both decks, it's referencing the constellation of Aquarius. And I never read the following in any history books or any sources. I think I'm the only person that's made this comment. And I say it in many videos, especially when the Star card pops up. When the constellation of Aquarius showed up in the sky, especially in the east, that was a sign that there was opportunity for irrigating the land because the rains were going to come. So the star, I think in the reference to Aquarius, because I really did some deep hole digging for why is the Aquarius symbol for the star? But it was because when they looked at the sky and they saw Aquarius in the sky, they knew it was a good time to irrigate the land because the rains were coming. So it becomes a symbol for opportunity. And before that, when we just see the star, we know that it's a symbol for navigation and finding your way. Right? I mean, sailors, navigators, navigate using the star. We use a compass that, directs us to the northern direction. So we use stars, not that the compass uses stars. But, the configuration within a compass is a star. But, we use the star to navigate, and we use the star to take opportunity. But it's also a star of hope, right? Because when we're children, we wish upon a star. So it has multifaceted layers, and it could mean all those things. In the context of the question, it could mean all of them or just one of them. The moon, pretty similar. Yeah, pretty similar. So everything the moon conjures up, things that happen at night, people who are thwarting someone else. This crustacean is coming, they come up at night. It's another rabbit hole I went down. What's with the crustacean and tell me, I didn't even ask about the moon card or anything. I was just like, tell me about crustaceans, this was years ago. And the crustaceans come out at night to eat, but the dogs would thwart the crustacean from surfacing because they're the enemy. They'd eat them, they'd hurt them, they'd attack them and chew them and think it was a toy, So if they're distracted by the moon, I'm starting to see a new way. Because if they're distracted by the moon, maybe that's the opportunity for the crustacean to come up and do something. But he's still being thwarted, So I see the moon as, being thwarted to because there are enemies afoot or people who are doing things that are preventing you from getting ahead. So maybe if you see the star car and this together, or in the same spread, it just might be a suggestion to take your opportunity when you have it, because there's people around you who might not be happy, or who may be working against you. And then you see if the magician card of, not this magician card, because this magician has a different feel, a different meaning, but of the TDM, right? The magician card with this card says, yeah, there's people who would prefer to hold you down because they're tricking you. I think the sun card for any deck just means the sun. This could be a nod to the Via Veal. I think we see a child on a horse in the Via Veal. She was apparently familiar with that deck, as she was familiar with the Solabusca. Excuse me, I had to take a sip. But we have youth. These youth don't look so happy, but that could have just been, regarding the quality of the engraving or the print. This kid's joyous, as we all are in the sun on a great day. Now, are these kids in water? Are they swimming? Could they, are those like, they're part, they look like they could be nude, but they have maybe I don't know what's going on here. It varies from, historic deck to historic deck. Some people say they're in a walled garden, a bricked garden, and, they're just enjoying the lovely day. Some looks like they might be, they're standing on a rock, maybe in a river. This could be a riverbank. I don't know. But it just looks like a happy, fun day. As I think this most clearly illustrates with the sunflowers and the sun and the happy little kid. Okay, I think there's no getting around this one. Judgment, I think, is the same. Could mean announcements. But, my first go-to thought is that it's about being held accountable for things. It's in the context of the question. If you want to do it, sometimes am I going to get engaged within the next 6 months? And I see this card, either card, it could be an announcement being made, But if it's about something else, should I do something? It's like, well, you be careful, because you have to be able to account for your actions, or if you're going to be interviewed by, a new person for the job, you may be held accountable for lapses in dates or whatever you have on your resume, that kind of thing. Do they even use resumes anymore? I don't even know. Well, here we have quite a few more people who are rising, right? Here we only have 3. And the World card, and we have very similar based on TDM2, clearly. I think we're already at 48 minutes. Here's what I'm going to do. I know some of you want to see the court cards. I'm going to do it, but it's going to be only available in a link down below. All right? So, link down below for the court cards. Alrighty? Until next time, friends, peace. Stay well and continue to be brave.